Merhaba, Sabine. How are you all? Thank you very much. Ashley, how are you? Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for joining us for this really important session. And Ben and I were just saying that this is really, apart from the fact it's an incredibly important topic, it's also one that I think has absolutely found its time. We have had 210 people sign up for today's session, which is actually a record. So thank you very much indeed to everyone who's joined us, and thank you especially, Ben, to you for doing this. Hello, Susan. Your Ignite in Portugal really touched a lot of people, and I think gave us all, real food for thought. So I'm so glad that you can follow up for us today. Just a note to everybody coming in, the session's being recorded. So if you do have to step off, it's fine. I'll get that edited down and send that to you tomorrow. We're going to do all the Q&A in the chat box, if that's okay. So if you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's the little chat symbol. Just open that up. I know Alexandra, Audrey, Susan, thank you very much. You have found it. Just remember that I'm not sure it's the same on every machine, but on my Mac, the default as to who can see your messages is host and panelists. And if you want everyone to see it, then you just need to scroll down to everyone. If you just want Ben to see it, scroll down to Ben. If you want me and Ben to see it, I need to see it because I'm going to moderate the chat. So it's probably best if you scroll down to everybody. That would be awesome. And then that also means that we can store the chat so that those questions can be distributed afterwards, because it puts it into a document. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. As I say, 210 people have signed up. I know that there will still be quite. Hello, Sarah from Seattle. How are you? Jeremy, lovely to see you. Javier, how are you? Tracy, it's really nice. Everyone's coming in. Sean, lovely to see you too. Right, let's get on with the substance. And Ben, I'm going to hand to you. Thank you again so much for being here. We'll do all the Q&A at the end, so please feel free at any time to put a question in that chat box. I will keep a close eye on that. Thank you, Connie. And we'll come to that, Ben, when you're ready at the end. So I'm going to hand over to you. There you go. That should then make you the host, which means you can share your screen. Again, when we're ready at the end, I'll take that back. But in the meantime, hello to everyone who's coming in. Thank you all so much for being here. Ben, thank you so much for being here. And I will now disappear into the wonders of cyberspace until we're done. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to go through the standard procedure of making sure everyone can see my screen before we start. I'll look for a thumbs up from you, Dom, when it appears, as you're the only one I can see. Perfect. So yes, thank you very much for the introduction, and I wanted to say thank you as well to Dom and to Yura for giving me the platform to talk about it, to expand on it. On the back of my Ignite session in Villamor. It's a subject that's very, very close to my heart. I think it's very, very important for our industry, and I think obviously for wider society as well. And one of the things, I suppose the downsides of doing an Ignite session for anyone who's done it is you have to cram your subject into 5 minutes. So the opportunity to be able to expand on that, I'm really, really grateful for. So to give you an overview of what the briefing is going to be today, we're going to, first and foremost, we're going to cover the survey results. I got over 100 responses from the survey, so thank you to every single one of you that filled that out. So I'm really excited to share the results with you. I think a lot of, when we talk about mental health, and especially things like anxiety, we talk about how much of it is assumed. And I think sometimes actually checking the facts, and in this case, how our mental health actually looks at work, I think is a really valuable thing to do. So we'll cover that. But I don't want it all just to be looking at statistics and things like this. I wanted to give you some advice, hopefully, and some hints and tips, things that have helped me along the way with stress, being overwhelmed, anxieties, and things like that. And then lastly, if you are someone who manages a team, or if you're responsible for other people at work as well, then obviously that's something that we'll cover too. As Dom says, the chat will be open, so feel free to pop any questions, remarks, comments or suggestions in there, and there will be time at the end for us to get to all of those. The reality is that the subject of well-being this is not a term that I think we're unfamiliar with in our industry. I think actually when we look at the job that we do, we are involved in people's lives when they're maybe at their most stressed, overwhelmed, or anxious themselves. So I think we're very fortunate in a sense to be able to play such a big role in alleviating a lot of that sort of mental load that they go through. And I was having this conversation at a separate event last week. Regardless where you sit in the ecosystem of relocation as a DSP, we speak to people about these anxieties right from the start, whether it be the schools their children go to, the homes they end up living in, where they're likely to live. People who do cultural training play a huge role in this. If you're in immigration, you're speaking to people right at the start of this process. And if you're in service accommodation, for example, you're often the very first front door that people get to open in their new city, that they can close behind them, feel an element of calmness and safety to go on and do that. So these are not conversations for us that we're probably unfamiliar with. But the conversation that I think is important to have moving forward, and on the back of the survey and everything that we've spoken about, is what goes on behind our doors and our office doors. And I think this is a very traditional image of an office. I realize all of our workspaces can look much different now. Some of you will be watching from home, some of you will be from a shared office, some of you will still be very much in the office, some of you might even be watching in your car. But the reality is, wherever we are delivering these really helpful services to these wonderful assignees, what I want to do is focus on what's happening behind that door, because I think sometimes it's often the thing that can get overlooked, and such is the theme of the briefing today, and it's about putting your own mask on first. Now, a lot of you, by the very design of our industry, a lot of you will have been on an aeroplane, some of you probably quite recently, where we'll all be familiar with the point of the safety announcement that says, in the event of an emergency, oxygen masks will fall down from above your head, and then it says, please ensure that you fit your own mask before helping anyone else. And there's obviously a very practical reason for this on an aeroplane. It's because you need to be breathing yourself before you start assisting everyone else. But I find it's a really brilliant analogy for mental health, and for especially in a service role, in a service industry like we are, where we are doing so much for others. And perhaps it's poignant that we're having this discussion at the end of a summer, where perhaps it's even busier than usual, to make sure that actually the people that are helping others are helping themselves as well. And there's two reasons for it. One of them is, of course, we're always going to be in the best possible place to help someone else if we're okay, but really for ourselves as well. So that was the conversation that I wanted to have. And I think it's a really good analogy and a good way of looking at how we look after ourselves. Now, I realized that when I did my Ignite presentation in Villamora, there was some pretty hard-hitting facts, and the truth of the matter is that we can't get away from these statistics and these facts. This was an article that was published just last month. In fact, Dom and I were chatting before we came on about how much more prevalent the conversation of mental health is now. There are far more companies that are taking it more seriously. I know from speaking to people in education, this is something that is spoken about in schools all the time now from quite a young age, which is brilliant. But the problem is that makes these statistics even harder to read. The fact of the matter is that in 2023, it was the highest year for 24 years for suicides in England and Wales. And I think there's a large train of thought that says that the pandemic has had a huge impact on that as well. But I think even with that, when you contrast how much, I suppose, the perception of how much help and support is out there, those numbers are really high. I mentioned back before that 3/4 of those people will be men. These tend to be how these statistics go. But actually, when you read further into the article, it's the highest rate of suicide for women in over 30 years. So the number of women that this is affecting is actually getting worse as opposed to better. So quite clearly, this is something that doesn't discriminate. And when we look further into it, it doesn't. This is, as I've said before, this is normally the end of someone's mental health journey. It's incredibly tragic end, but there's often months, weeks, years of pain and stuff that leads up to that. This wasn't my survey, by the way. I didn't manage to get 8 million people to answer my my questions, but this is a wider survey that was done that shows 86% of the UK feel stressed at least one day a month. Personally, if I only felt stressed one day a month, I would absolutely take that. I think that's an absolutely brilliant average. And as for the 14% of the country that feel stressed no days in a month, I'd like to know where they work so that I can apply for a job. Over 8 million people in the UK are suffering with anxiety. It's a huge number of people, and less than half of them will access any treatment. And then 7 million people are suffering with depression, and over 5 million of those people will remain untreated. So I think actually when you look at the numbers, I think it was just over 6,000 people that took their lives last year. If you think that's based on 5 million people with untreated depression in this country, it's quite clear to me how that trend is going to go. So this is a really serious thing to consider, I say, for wider society, but for our industry as well. And when we talk about mental health at work, I did want to make this very clear point that I think it's very difficult to differentiate between the two. I think if you struggle with your mental health at home, it's very difficult to turn that off when you get into the office. And likewise, if you're suffering at work, it's very difficult to turn that off when you get home as well. The reality is, if you are suffering with stress, with being overwhelmed, with anxiety, or with depression, that is not going to discriminate as to what time of the day that you feel like that. So I think it's very important to accept that this is a problem in life and in society, as opposed to a problem specifically within our workplaces. So as I said, that what I wanted to start with was the results of that survey. So thank you very, very much for everyone that completed it. I had I suppose some predictions and assumptions about what those results would look like, but I think one of the things that's really, really important is to actually find out what the reality is, because I think a lot of it is assumption. So to put our finger on the pulse and see what's happening is a really important thing to do. So I asked how often you felt stressed or overwhelmed at work. And if you actually break down the statistics from the wider statistics, I said there were 86% was at least once a month. That's exactly what these figures tell us here. You'll notice there's no purple. So there is no one in our industry that never feels stressed or overwhelmed, which is possibly not surprising. Again, maybe the timing at the end of the summer has played a part in that. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of the people that answered either feel stressed or overwhelmed every day, or certainly every week. Now, this is, on the face of it, can look like some quite scary statistics. Stress is something that is part of everyday life. It's part of working, I think, in most industries. So I think it's good to accept that it's there. We can't ever say, well, we're going to find a way to completely eliminate stress from our lives. That's not the reality of the situation. Sometimes it's knowing that there is stress, knowing who feels it, and then how can we manage the stress when we're there. So that was something that I thought was really interesting. But for me, it almost exactly mirrored what the rest of the country was. Now, the second one, which was probably a larger percentage than I expected to get, I asked if you had felt anxious or depressed at work within the last 12 months. Now, 73% of people, I say, I had over 100 responses. So if we're looking at a room of 100 people, that is 73 people that have felt anxious or depressed at work in the last 12 months. Now, that is a huge, huge number when I think we think of it. And for me, it's maybe quite scary to look at, but I would actually say that there is an element of comfort you can take from it, in the sense of sometimes where we feel that we are anxious, depressed, stressed, overwhelmed, whatever it might be, we have a fear of being able to put our hand up and say that's how we feel, because we might feel that we're going to be judged. We might feel we're the only one. We might feel that we're in the minority. The reality is, if you're feeling anxious or depressed in this industry, from the people that I've asked, you're very much in the majority. And in fact, it's the people that can put their hand up and say, I don't feel anxious or depressed, that are the minority. So I think, if anything, try and put a positive spin on what is quite can make quite sort of sad reading is if you are one of those 73 people, then you are certainly not on your own. You are in the majority. And I guarantee if you speak to one or two other people in your company or in this industry, you will find a familiar answer coming back your way. So that was a very interesting thing that I looked at there. Again, this is from a wider study, but I thought it was really important to sort of emphasize this point that in the UK, it's actually just over 50% of all long-term absence from work is purely down to stress, anxiety, and depression. And I think some of the comments I got from the survey were talking about the balance between treating physical and mental health as the same thing. And the statistics show us that it very much is. I would even go as far to say as I think there's probably some of the everything else that creeps into the other column, because I think sometimes it can take the physical reaction to your mental health problems to actually be the catalyst that ends up with you being off work. I think sometimes when I think back, a lot of us will be able to relate to the earliest time that we maybe had anxiety. When you're a child, you have those famous butterflies in your tummy before you go off to do something that might be a bit new or a bit different. And if you use that as an example of how quickly your body can have a very physical reaction to something that's happening in your head, if you then scale that up to maybe weeks, months, years of stress, anxiety, and depression, when you imagine the physical toll that can have on your body over time, I think actually those statistics are far more likely to be higher in the favor of mental health over physical health. So this is a far more colourful pie chart, which is good. So I asked, how often does your workplace talk about mental health initiatives or resources? Again, quite colourful, but the smallest answer is regularly. And if you actually look at it, over half of the people surveyed work somewhere where they are either rarely or never spoken about. I don't want this, I should point out, to be a finger pointing exercise. This is, for me, it's very important to start the conversation, but we have to start from where we are as opposed to where we assume that we are. So I say really good that I think we've got companies that are regularly talking about it, even companies that talk about it at all when we look at occasionally. I think that's brilliant, but I say there's clearly some room for some improvement there as well. So I asked if people had received any education or training related to mental health at work. Again, fairly overwhelming answer is no. Sometimes, again, we'll come to some statistics about managers and how they can help and lead and things when it comes to mental health. But sometimes it is down to education and training. You can't suddenly learn all this overnight. This is something that is a process. But the fact of the matter is, if the resources and the education aren't there for people, again, it comes back, and again, Dom and I were speaking about it earlier, what this can lead to is the stigma. So if we're not talking about it, there's no training, there's no resources, or it's not discussed. What that's going to do before it does anything else is set a tone that people maybe don't want to put their hand up if they are struggling. And when it comes to stigma, I thought this was a really good thing to ask as well. 34% said no stigma, so I think that's really, really good. And only 24%, so just under a quarter of the people asked, thought there was definitely a stigma in their workplace. For me, actually, the most interesting part of this question was the maybes. And the reason I say that is, if I put myself in a situation, or you might be able to do it yourselves, where you are struggling with your mental health, you have anxiety, whatever it might be. If you work somewhere where you thought there might be a stigma surrounding mental health, how likely do you think you would be to put your hand up and say, yeah, I'm struggling? I think sometimes, and I can only speak for myself, that when you're in that position where you think you should raise your hand or you think you should talk to someone, you're constantly looking at reasons not to, because it's sometimes what frightens you the most. So I think if you can say, well, there might be a stigma about it, I better not say anything, sometimes that's the easiest route. But I think really good that I say over 30%, nearly 35%, no stigma. So I think that's really great. I asked people how comfortable they would be in discussing their mental health with their colleagues. It almost mirrors the stigma pie chart. There are some that are very comfortable, which is great. There are some that are on the fence, not sure, and there are some that are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And what I would say in this sense, especially in terms of the not sures, and someone said this to me a long time ago with how do you know how you can trust someone? And the quickest way to find out is to trust them, because you'll soon find out if you can or you can't. So I think if you're not sure whether you feel comfortable or not, I would say err on the side of being sure and looking at the statistics where we're saying that the percentages of people that feel anxiety and depression at work are so high, the chances are that that will end up being a positive conversation. I then asked the same question about approaching your manager. This was far more overwhelming in terms of people feeling uncomfortable and very uncomfortable, or very uncomfortable, I should say. Now, this can often be, I think, when you look at a workplace generally, if I asked how much would you feel, do you feel like you're judged by your colleagues compared to your manager? I think that's maybe sways it a bit as well. That's sometimes the last person that you would want to look vulnerable to, but often it would be the best person that would be able to solve that problem. So I think that's a percentage that we could get down. But again, there's a really good number of people that feel comfortable or very comfortable talking to their manager. So I think if you're one of those people, or if you're one of those managers where people feel like that, then I think that's a really good thing. I would also be really keen, and it's, as happens with most surveys that you do, one question leads to another, and then you want to ask the next thing and the next thing. When we were talking earlier about assumption and what we assume about mental health and things like that, I wonder if we asked just the managers, how comfortable do you think your staff would be about approaching you? I wonder if they would think that people were very comfortable or very uncomfortable, because I think sometimes it's about, like I say, checking the facts. And I'll touch on it later, but one of the things that I thought when we were starting to get so many responses to the survey was, we should do this on an individual basis. It would be really good, I think, for each company to be able to create their own survey to get your finger on the pulse of what's happening in your business. You can tailor the questions to be whatever you want to know, but I think sometimes the best place to start is with what we know. And I think, again, if we all were very honest with ourselves, would we assume that 70% of our workforce felt anxious or depressed in the last year? We'd probably say no. I don't think it would be that high. So I think to check the facts is a really good thing in that sense. So that was the results of the survey. I say there's definitely some positives in there, but there's some things that we probably need to acknowledge, that we need to improve on. But I didn't want it to be, I say, a finger pointing exercise. This isn't to say, we're not doing enough, we're not doing enough. It's to say, what can we do next? I want this to be the start of that conversation. I was talking to Lucy Foster at Impact Group about the webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the industry as a whole and things like this. And then we were saying, actually, if there's one community that is capable of tackling this problem better than anyone, then it would be ours. It is, as we're all familiar with, it is a remarkable bunch of people that are completely human-centric because of all of the energy that we put into our assignees. You've only got to go to a Euro conference to feel that energy around you. And I think all we need to do is actually focus on sometimes where we put that energy, as opposed to outward. We maybe need to look inward, but we're certainly the industry that is fit for the job. So they are the statistics. I didn't want it to just be a case of looking at numbers all day. So I wanted to share with you some, hopefully some hints and some tips that you can take away with you that will help you managing your own mental health. I should point out that what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. A lot of the time it's about finding out what can trigger you, how you can respond to it. But these are some of the things that people have told me. So I wanted to share those with you today. So one of the things that, and for those of you that don't know, anxiety has been my thing. I'm 35 years experience in it, not studying, but suffering. And the key for me, really understanding what it was that I was feeling and how to manage it and stuff, was actually looking at the definition of anxiety in itself. And it's the last two words that were really the thing for me. It's the uncertain outcome. Because when something has an uncertain outcome, it means the list of outcomes are endless. And if you are someone with anxiety, you are an overthinker, or for those of you familiar with the term catastrophizer, then that means that list can go on and on and on. And the quote by Mark Twain, when I first saw it, felt like someone had seen my entire life. And it's very true. I would have a tradition of running through hypothetical situations in my head that could happen. You end up getting all the negative side effects of it. So you get the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the stress, And then the majority of those things never end up happening anyway. So you never actually have to go through it. You just get all the suffering in the meantime. So one of the things that I was told, this was my therapist said this to me, and she said, I know you're a catastrophizer. I know with every situation you're going to paint the worst possible picture of it. And you're for the time being, you're going to have to accept that. But do me a favor, the next time you do it, when you're doing your what ifs on the negative side, just do your what ifs on the positive side, just to see what they look like. So I'll give you an example. If you have anxiety perhaps about not getting a ticket for Zagreb in 2025, and you're thinking about it on the Friday and thinking, what if I log on and my internet's down? What if I've forgotten my password? What happens if my credit card declines and I can't book the ticket? And then what happens if I don't go to Euro? And then I won't get any business, and then I'll lose my job, and then and before you know it, the absolute worst thing in the world has happened. Well, if you paint it the other way and say, well, what if I can log on time? What if I've got my card details next to me? What if I know that actually my internet's fine and works every other day, so there's no reason for it not to? And what if at 1:05 I've got a Euro ticket and I can look forward to it? Well, suddenly that side looks far more appealing. And the best part of it is that side is far more likely to happen than the negative side. So whenever, if you are someone who can spiral like that, the next time that you do, just paint the other side of the picture, and you'll find you get far closer to that than the other side. So that's something that's really helped me. And I still do the catastrophizing. I just do the good bits afterwards, and then I normally feel fine. So that's the first thing that I would recommend. One of the second things that I discovered about myself is that I am a people pleaser. I have been for, I think, my entire life. I like people to say that I'm doing a good job. And what that can lead us to do is to say yes to everything. Now, when I say learn to say no, I don't want people to finish this webinar and go and start telling their bosses or their partners or their assignees, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not being a people pleaser anymore. But what's important to do is to learn when to say no. And I think sometimes we can be so tempted to give so much of ourselves so that people think highly of us, that actually it's having the power to say no to something. A good example would be if you're, if there's after work drinks, for example, and you get invited to go along, and in your head you think, what I really want to do is go home with a cup of tea, relax in front of the telly because I know I've got a big day tomorrow. There's often such a temptation to say, do you know what? Yes, because if I don't go, what will my boss think? What will they think? What will that be? And what you're doing is you're doing something for other people, which in reality, their judgment won't be anywhere near what you think it is. And you're sacrificing yourself for that. And that's there is not an infinite amount of time that you can keep doing that. So this is a really good book. I wanted to pop it on here that I listened to. I do a lot of audio books. I'm not a great reader. I haven't got the patience for it. But that is a really, really good book. And if you recognize yourself in that example, Curing the People Pleasing Syndrome is a really good book as well. And if anyone else has got any other books as well that they've read that have really helped them, then definitely pop those in the chat. I think it'd be really good to share those as well. But that was me. I'm very much a people pleaser. So if anyone on here ever hears me saying no, it's because I've read this book and I'm trying to find some space for me sometimes. This is another thing that was very, very specific to me. I am an avid list maker. I have a spreadsheet for just about everything. I think there'll be people on this webinar that I've shared this with before. When I go to Euro, I don't just have an Excel spreadsheet for my meetings. I have an Excel spreadsheet for what outfit I'm going to wear in the day and in the night for every day at Euro. So if you see me on the Tuesday in Zagreb and I'm wearing a certain pair of trousers and a shirt, just know that was planned probably 6 weeks in advance. But the reason that I bring it up now is because this was something else that someone brought to me when I was talking about how I felt, especially when I was at work, where I'd maybe be in the middle of a project and I would have a ton of other things that would come into my mind all the time. So I'd be doing one thing, I've got to do that as well. Now I'm worried about that. And it's never just work things, it's home things, it's everything. And someone said to me, look, a really good thing to do, you like doing lists, right? A really good thing to do, when something comes into your head, write it down on a bit of paper and schedule a time to deal with that list of things that you're worried about. When you get to that time, ask yourself 2 questions. First one, am I still worried about it? If the answer is no, cross it off. The second question is there anything that I can do about it? So can I impact this thing that's worrying me? If the answer is no, you cross it out, and then you're just left with a list of things that you are still worried about, but you can change. And then you can start doing it. And the reality is, this isn't about giving you an extra task to do in a week. It's a trick. You know, our brains learn things over time. It's a trick to get things out of your brain as quickly as they come into it so that you can focus on what you're doing at that time. So I did the physical act of writing these lists for about, I think I did it for about 2 months. And then very quickly, you just get used to shifting it as it comes in to it going out again. So it's a really good thing to do. But I say the first thing, if you are a list maker or you do enjoy making lists, it is a good way to try and physically get things out of your head. And the next thing I want to talk about, and this is I think this is the penultimate point for our own individual masks, was about panic attacks. Now I spoke at an event last week, and I mentioned panic attacks there, and I wanted to ask the audience if anyone there had ever had a panic attack, and I was really banking on at least one person saying that they had, so I could use that as an example to talk about. Now, when I asked the room, I think maybe 20 to 30 people put their hands up and said, yep, I've done that. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but a really, really good technique for either in a panic attack, when you're having an anxiety attack, or you suddenly feel immensely overwhelmed and you don't feel like you're properly functioning. And again, it's a trick that we can do to basically reset our brain, and it's called the 3-3-3 technique, which I've seen when someone else had a panic attack, and it works absolutely brilliant. And what it involves you doing is putting both of your feet completely flat on the floor, and then looking for 3 things that you can see, 3 things that you can hear, and 3 things that you can either touch or smell. And the reason that we're doing it is not because we need to go and find these things, because that will be the evidence we need. It's that we have to tell our brain that we are not stopping breathing. We're not about to die. We are capable of doing all of these other things. And it's a really good way of just resetting. So that was a technique that that someone told me. I've seen it work. It's absolutely brilliant. It's very, very simple. But if you're ever in a situation where you're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, or someone else is, the 3-3-3 technique is a really, really good thing that you can do. And the last thing is a really, really obvious one. It's the reason that I left it to the end, because I think it's often the first thing that that people say. It can sometimes be in a lot of the I suppose the media, the way that it's portrayed and stuff. It's like, you should talk to someone. It's okay to be not. It's okay not to be okay, and everything that goes with it. Sometimes when you say you should talk to someone, that can be the absolutely most daunting thing in the world to someone who is suffering with their mental health. So I think what's a really important thing to say is that when someone says it, don't feel under any pressure for it to be a specific someone. A lot of people as well, I've spoke to people that thought the same thing, is you really need to talk to someone, or you'd really benefit from talking to someone. It's often assumed that that person is a professional, and it's like basically saying you need to go and speak to a therapist. Now, that may well be the case, and it might be that you hugely benefit from that therapist, but I would say don't put any pressure on yourself for that to be where you start. I would say start wherever you can, whether that is your friend, your partner, your parents, your colleague, your boss, a complete stranger in a coffee shop, and then a therapist as well. I personally spoke to an awful lot of people before I got into therapy, and I think if I hadn't have had those conversations with my friends and family beforehand, I wouldn't have been as comfortable probably sharing as much as I did in therapy. So sometimes it isn't always the best place to start. And as I mentioned before, we are in an industry and a community where we have so many brilliant people at our fingertips. You know, I've had conversations with people that are probably on this call within the last 2 years about things that have happened in my life that I haven't spoken to people about that I've known for 25 years. So we have these brilliant people at our fingertips. Don't put any pressure on yourself as to who you need to speak to. The first step is just to speak to someone. So I would definitely encourage us all to do that. Now, that is our own mask. I appreciate there'll be people on this call that are not just responsible for that when they're at work, but also the masks of others. And a wider Forbes study, and this was a really interesting statistic that I saw. This was about 4,500 people that were asked. Nearly 70% of them said that their manager has more impact on their mental health than their therapist or their doctor, and it's equal to their partner. Now, this isn't a way of scaring the life out of every manager and leader on this call, but the reality is that that is what people feel, and I think it's a reason to take it seriously. But I think it's also a way of saying, okay, so if that is the case, then what can we do, and what are we going to do as leaders? You'll see I've moved on from Mark Twain quotes to the Jungle Book, but I really like this. I really like this quote. I think it works brilliantly in a work environment. I think it works brilliantly in a family environment, in a group of friends, whatever it might be. That one does not work without the other. And I think certainly when we're talking about mental health, and I think we're talking about things like that in the workplace, I think it's incredibly poignant to look at it like that. So what can we do if we're in charge of a team? Well, the first thing to say is, and again, it was the same study that showed that actually a third of the managers that were spoken to actually felt like they struggled to support their team with mental health concerns. Now, there's various reasons for that. A lot of it can come back to the training, to the education, but actually an awful lot of those people that struggle are because they're struggling themselves. And I think sometimes, whereas the inclination is to help, and maybe you feel like you're helping, if you're not in the greatest place yourself, that's a very, very difficult thing to navigate when you're now responsible for other people. So there'll be no surprise in what the first step is that I would say to any manager or leader of a team is to basically go back to step one. The very best thing that you can do, first of all, is to put your own mask on. And by that, I mean, have a close look at how you feel. If you're struggling, get the help that you feel that you can. So that would be the very first point that I would make. The second point is the smallest one on there. It's just 2 words, but it's probably the one thing as a leader or as a business owner maybe is the hardest thing to do. You are essentially the captain of the ship, and I think sometimes it's the hardest thing for that person to look vulnerable. It was the whole purpose of my conversation at Eura. It is undeniably one of the most powerful things you can do in any dynamic. I think as a leader, I think the impact that would have would be absolutely huge. I appreciate that is a huge, huge leap to take, depending on how big your team is and things like this. But this would be something that I would say is definitely worth considering. It might take you a little while to get there, but I think is a hugely important thing to do if you can. The third one, we mentioned it earlier, but I think creating your own survey would be an absolutely brilliant place to start, because I think we can assume what goes on in our workplace an awful lot. And I think with something as important as this, I think to actually find out what's happening on the ground, how people really feel, you can make these completely anonymous. And I think when you do that, you allow far more room for people to be honest, and let that be the start of the conversation. I think, the listening to what your team needs feels like an obvious one, but I think this brought me back to when we would discuss flexible working and things like this, and there was a huge conversation post-COVID about the benefits of being able to work from home, and there's no commute, and my mental health is much better because I get to walk down the river at lunchtime and everything that goes with it. But when you consider the person that maybe lives on their own and relied on that office and that commute for their social interactions throughout the week, actually that didn't work for them at all. And those were the people whose mental health probably suffered far more greatly. And I think when we acknowledge that, and when we talk about mental health, it's exactly the same thing. What works for one person does not work for the next. So I think the more you can gain an understanding of what works, the better. And I say it's why I asked the question on the survey. It was the very last one. What would be the first thing that you would want your company to do to impact your mental health? And the answers were varied, but they all had almost an identical theme. We had some stuff about access to counselling, mental health days, and things like this. Predominantly, it was around culture. I'm going to share some of the answers with you now. And the culture is something that takes an awful lot longer to implement than anything else. With the benefits of ChatGPT, we can log on and write a mental health policy once this webinar is finished, and we can have that sent out to our staff in the morning. We can give them access to counsellors, to therapists, to mental health days, and everything in between. But if someone doesn't feel like they can put their hand up and say that they don't feel all right, they're far less likely to ever be able to use any of these services that you're offering. So the very first place that you need to start is in the culture. And when we talk about safe communication, and it's referred to sometimes as psychological safety at work, it's not just about mental health. It's how confident are people at work about making a mistake? How confident are people at work about having an opinion or having a new idea? How confident are they about disagreeing with an opinion of someone who maybe is their superior? And this all plays into this psychological safety that we feel at work. When we look at some of the answers that we got, they all, I say that I've got 2 pages of these, otherwise we would have had pages and pages, but it all took the same theme about creating a space, initiating conversation without judgment, be open, recognizing it, encouraging the dialogue, making sure people feel comfortable, listening without judgment, offering the support as required, talk about it, remove the stigma, create an emotionally safe environment. And then I say these are all things that are directly linked to the culture and how people feel coming to work. And sometimes, as I say, we need to remove almost the mental health label that we attach to it and think about it as generally how freely do people feel they're able to talk. Because if someone doesn't feel like they can put their hand up and have a new idea or disagree with someone, the chances of them ever putting their hand up and saying that they're struggling are almost zero. So I think it's a really good thing to do. I would ask as many people in your company as you can about their mental health. I think an anonymous survey is a brilliant way to start. I know we've covered an awful lot today. I say really, really pleased to have the platform to do it. I didn't want this to be a finger pointing exercise. Absolutely not. I want this to be the start of a conversation that we have as a community. I think, as I say, we are the absolute right people for the job. But I think we can start that conversation today. So thank you again to Dom and to Europe for giving me the platform to be able to talk about it. And yeah, I think I'm going to guess we've got some questions, Dom.
We do indeed, and if anybody has some questions they'd like to put, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. Ben, that was awesome. The responses that have been coming through the chat box have been phenomenal. People are really delighted that you have opened up this topic and and made something that's so important. Also, everything you put about creating the safe voice space. There's so many things that I made notes of. First of all, Melissa, I couldn't go back to you about the name of the book. It's The Disease to Please by Harriet Breaker, but I know somebody put that in there, so thank you very much. There are a few other book suggestions that I thought I'd just bring to your attention, which people were putting through. Lorna recommends The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I will send the chat with everybody, so you've got access to those. And I think at 3:30, I was writing down the time code so I could go back. Nuran, Solve for Happy by Mo Gaudat, I think was one that came out. Susan, you mentioned, this is at 15:36, if you're scrolling back through your, Adam Grant's books are excellent, Give and Take and Think Again. Some really interesting comments. I'll just highlight a few because there were so many, and again, Ben, they've been so positive. And this is something that touches everybody. Right at the beginning, Javier, you put in the chat, there may always be more than one stressed and overwhelming day at work. However, the key maybe is having a fine balance of the days which you thoroughly enjoyed and working in the days which were just satisfactory, which I thought was very interesting. Audrey, she says, I'm used to deal with stress. I'm new to this business. I started in May, and it's more difficult for me to deal with when things get tough. I thought that was really interesting because, as Lucy, you've put throughout, and Ben, you alluded as well to the fact that this is an industry where people are very happy to put their mask on and dive in. So, Andrew, you made a very interesting point. I was once told, when you have a bad day at work, when you get home, write down all the good things that happened in the day. Everything from the stranger who said hello, the person who smiled at you, the joke that made you laugh, that call that made you feel good. You soon realize it wasn't such a bad day after all. And Angela, you wrote, I love this quote. If a problem is fixable, if a situation is such that you can do something about it, then there is no need to worry. If it's not fixable, then there's no help in worrying. There's no benefit in worrying whatsoever. And that's from the Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World by the Dalai Lama. I thought that was extremely, and Lucy, you said all these comments just go to show that Ben and I were right in our observations of our industry. And I'm cool, we're really lucky to work with and around such thoughtful, caring, and emotionally intelligent people, and together we can all help to make sure we've got our masks in place. There's a few more comments that have come in. Really, just thank you so much. I mean, Ben, when you tackled this and you talked about, anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm sure out of the 97 people who are still on this call, along with me, we've all had that. And certainly when that happened to me, and when I've discussed it with colleagues in Europe, oh, and by the way, I've just got to give a big shout out to the team because they're dealing with so many bookings, you can't believe it. And we tried to make sure that, again, I was talking with Kirsty and Maria, with Brian this morning, and just like with any manager, I'm trying to say to them, look, it's incredibly stressful, but no one's going to really suffer. We're very mindful of the fact that, Ben, as you alluded to at the beginning, and something you don't know the outcome of is very stressful. So we're trying to make sure that we've told you all, you've got your place. So bear with. Alistair, thank you. Really excellent presentation. Very well done, Ben. There's loads of fantastic comments. Does anybody have a comment they'd like to make about a specific thing? Diana, I'd be curious to hear what companies are doing for resources for their employees and what benefits are offered for mental health. Great session. Ben, do you know anything about that? I mean, obviously, we're talking here about the UK, not necessarily the US.
Yeah, I think I asked a lot of people what there is available. I think it's becoming more prevalent in businesses that they're offering stuff. I think I know a lot of companies that have these mental health days. I think what's really good about them as well, that the companies that have them, the mental health days are compulsory, so you don't get the choice of whether you take them or not, which I think is a really clever way of removing the stigma. So like it's almost, you can say, well, they're compulsory, so I've got to take one. You haven't actually got to say I need one. So I think that's a really brilliant thing. There are companies that give access to the to therapy and to counselling, which I think is brilliant. That comes with a huge cost, as we know. So that's not as easy for everyone to implement. I do know one of the things as well. I was speaking to someone the other day about it, of almost a way around it. If you maybe haven't got the budget, if you are a company that offers private healthcare, make sure that your provider includes mental health care as well as physical health. But that's a really, really good way of not being necessarily that as a company saying we're going to provide all of this, but you almost should, as an added bonus, you get the benefit of it as well. And
again, that isn't always certain, is it? You do have to check that. You're quite right.
No, you have to absolutely check that. But I say the biggest thing for me is it's about listening and the culture, because there are, like I say, you can find dozens and dozens of examples of companies that have mental health policies, but if it's not somewhere where someone feels confident enough to talk about it, then it struggles. But I think the access to counselling, I think sometimes in itself, and it was one of the points that I made last week, when we look at mental health, and it's not an exact science, but you can look at it and say, well, we can feel stressed and overwhelmed. That can lead to anxiety. Anxiety can lead to depression, and then you're really at the end of that thing. That's not a direct thing, but let's say it is in the majority of cases. Like with any physical illness, the earlier you catch something, the far better chance you have of positively impacting your life. So if we can say at stress level, if you like, okay, I need to do something about this. Maybe I'm going to start saying no to people. Maybe I'm going to start doing this. Actually, doing it before you get right to the other end of it, I think is a really, really important thing to do. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be treating this as we would a physical condition. The statistics are there as to how much it's affecting people. So I think the earlier we can all put our hands up and say so, the better. I wanted to touch on something, I forget who said it, but about coming back to the positive things that happened in the day. And this is a really good point, because this is our trained brain that is looking for trouble and sometimes looking for negativity. If we're in that spiral, that's what we'll do. We'll almost look for examples to support our beliefs. It's like, I've had a bad day. Okay, how can I prove that? This happened, then this happened, then I worried about that, and then the traffic on the way home. But it's exactly like flipping the narrative, but in reverse. Okay, you think you had a bad day. What actually happened? Oh, this was good. Then that happened. That was good. I had a nice lunch. Traffic was good. And before you know it, it's like, nah, maybe it was a mixed day in the end. Maybe it wasn't just a bad day. So I think that's a really good way to look at it.
again, it's like catastrophizing in retrospect, isn't it? It's very interesting. And I think Lucy, you made a point earlier in the chat about or maybe it was Susan, I'm sorry, I forget, but somebody said about a gratitude diary. And I know I started doing that quite a lot, just, you know, at a meditate at the end of the day, just going, okay, these are 4 things I really enjoyed today, or I was really grateful for. Still some really interesting points coming in. Thank you, Susan. Deloitte, McKinsey, and Gallup have conducted surveys and a lot of research re-wellness. It's worth reading, worth having a look. Tracy, key what Ben mentioned, if relocation leaders are listening, it's so important for the culture of the company to be one that accepts risk. If an employee doesn't feel safe, they will not voice their emotional state to their manager. John, excellent point. Don't forget your kids. My kids always got 2 mental health days per semester. They had a golden popsicle stick that they could bring me in the morning to get out of school that day, no questions asked. That's awesome. Melissa, thank you. In the US, many companies have EAPs, employee assistance programs, which offer many services, and they're completely anonymous. So your employer doesn't get any type of report showing the names of those that use them. That's brilliant. Marion, thank you. Leading a team is as challenging as supporting assignees. Taking a deep breath and putting on your mask before replying is a key point in life. Works not always, but needs to be a daily practice. And Susan, funnily enough, I even have a chat at the end of the day with my 11-year-old daughter to review the day in focus. She has 3 days a year that she can take. I've never heard of that before. That I don't think that happens in the UK. I think
No,
you'd have
no,
social services knocking
no.
on your door. Yeah. Laura, thank you. Not that my workplace has this problem, but there is a factual element to sometimes simply having too much work. No kidding. And this brings up the responsibility of business leadership and strength or not of their contribution to good mental health outcomes. I think going back to what we very first said, overwhelming. You know, that's such a key word, feeling overwhelmed. And certainly, yeah, I would hope that, Susan, I have to say I'm Dutch. Freedom is our power, I guess. There you go.
There you go. I think with the overwhelming thing, it's interesting because it's almost coming back to when a bit of the feedback I had in terms of what to do is someone said employ more staff. And it's like actually that's a really easy solution. If someone's mental health is being affected by that, and all it is that they're overworked, actually that's a far easier problem to solve. But I think it's frustrating. But I think, you know, from if you haven't got control over that as the employee, what you have got control over is the power to say no, or to say that you're overworked, or to say that you can't do it. I think sometimes we take on these extra tasks because we think, not even that we think will be well thought of, but it's just to prevent being badly thought of.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes that's what we try and avoid. And the reality is, and it was the quote that was on the slide at the time, if we never say no to anything, then our yes holds no value to anyone. It's just assumed you are the person that will always do it. And guess what? That means the very first time that something else needs doing, you're the first person that they're going to walk up to because you're not going to say no. It's not as simple as just doing that. But unfortunately, if that's the only thing in your power and you have enough on your desk, then that's really the place you've got to try and take yourself to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of the session. If anybody has any comments they'd like to make or questions that they'd like to ask Ben, please go right ahead before we quit. Oh, thank you, Andrew. That's very kind of you. Lyris, it is so hard to say no. Yeah, the disease to please, Harriet Breaker. I will definitely be downloading that. I'd like to, it's an audio book.
Very good.
Yeah, Ben, I can't thank you enough for that. I think that chimed and resonated so powerfully today with everybody. And thank you to everybody who's participated, and thank you for everybody who put comments in, because it really is I mean, this is a huge discussion. And thank you, Ken, and thank you to Angela. I would like to just say, you know, we're going to work with Ben, and the idea for the Zagreb conference, although we haven't actually got a theme name, the overall theme will be well-being. So we are going to continue this at the conference in Croatia. Thank you, everybody, for being part of it. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Amanda, for all your, and thank you to everybody for your really kind comments, and especially, Ben, thank you to you for your really brilliant expertise, your vulnerability, and your truth. It's been a great afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Everybody, look forward to seeing you, and soon, I hope, somewhere on another webinar. And in the meantime, Ben, can't thank you enough.
Thanks very
Oh,
much.
by the way, I was just going to ask, somebody did say in the, are you okay to share that PowerPoint with a lot of the
Yes,
points
yeah,
on
I'll
it?
send the
You
slides
sure?
out. Yeah, if I
Wonderful.
send them,
If you
I'll let
send
you
it to me, I'll put it in the recording thing that will go out to everybody tomorrow.
yeah,
So thank you so much again. Thank you to everyone for being here. And Ben, can't thank you enough. Great to spend time with you today. Thank you. Take
thanks,
care.
Dom.
Take
Bye,
care,
everyone.
everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.